Welcome to Blockchain Explained, the podcast about opportunities, challenges, and trends in blockchain technology. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, a developer, or just crypto curious, this podcast is for you. It features industry leaders and government officials discussing the world of distributed ledgers, cryptocurrencies, and the metaverse. And now, here are your hosts, Alan Rechtschaffen and Kelly Wicker.
Welcome back to Blockchain Explained. I'm really excited for today's episode. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Alan Rechtschaffen, Wilson Center trustee and chair of the Digital Assets Forum. I'm Kelly Wicker, and I direct the Science and Technology Innovation Program at the Wilson Center. Today, we're joined by Jared Ronis, who is a digital assets analyst and researcher, and a longtime crypto investor and enthusiast himself. And we're going to talk a little bit about just trends we're seeing this year and what we're excited about. So, Alan, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. It's been our tradition that early on in the year that we have somebody who's really in touch with the pulse of what's going on in the industry across blockchain, cryptocurrency, all the exciting stuff. Last year we had Laura Shen. This year we're excited to have Jared with us. And I was hoping that we could open it up. You know, our first episode of the year, we talked with somebody from AWS, and we were talking about tokenization. And he really saw tokenization and artificial intelligence as the big things, as the themes of 2024. And just to start our conversation, you know, maybe you tell a little bit about your background, but if you could tell us what you think the big themes of 2024, if you were going to label 2024, what would it look like?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I've been in in the blockchain space since which feels like an eternity in blockchain time, but we're talking around 2020 towards the end of DeFi summer. Something I've always been broadly interested in two things: people and technology, and we're kind of at that confluence there. And crypto and blockchain at large was always something on my radar early. I had friends who were buying Bitcoin early, and all of that jazz. But I was like, guys, let me know when it does something. It was like we were talking, the tech behind it, impressive, don't get me wrong, and really exciting. But, we're in this conceptual vaporware phase for so long. And coming to 2020, I spent about 5 years in large ad agencies we worked at Fortune 500 companies across the gamut from, direct to consumer, B2B, all that, a lot of high tech digital advertising campaigns. So you really get to see a lot of the inner workings. And I was researching, something popped on my radar, Brave web browser that had a privacy focused advertising model, which, was pretty really the opposite of how most digital advertising works. And I saw that they had a token element to it, and I was like, interesting. And as I started doing research into that, and in the periphery, this is when DeFi was really starting to pop off. That I was like, I think, are we exiting the vaporware stage now? And it seemed like we were, and went deep down the rabbit hole. Anytime I find something interesting, I just research it until I can be subject matter expert on it. And I was really excited about it. And as I was talking to my friends in tech and, journalists, I have some friends on the Hill, I was like, guys, crypto's happening. Do you look at all of these things? And there was either people who weren't aware, didn't care, but overwhelmingly a very negative connotation to it. And I was like, oh, guys, this is exciting. But then as I got deeper into the crypto world, I was like, oh, okay, there's the casino elements and all of that. But we're at a stage now, I think, this year, if I had to quantify where we are in 2024, is that we're exiting adolescence and we're kind of ready for prime time. A lot of tokenization is definitely something I think that is really exciting. To centralize physical infrastructure as well. AI is huge. I think we can spend a lot of time on that. But we're at the point now that a lot of these were conceptual ideas. It's really analogous, I think, to the .com era, where there was a lot of froth early on, I think at the peak, what we're at, like 6 trillion, the NASDAQ at the time was like 6 trillion in March of 2000 before everything crashed, and 78%, fast forward 2002, 78% of that market cap was gone. And I think that's kind of what we've gone through with crypto. But what's, I think the analogs that we can draw here is that's when Amazon, Google, all of those, like those kind of key infrastructure things, and really that capitalization is what brought broadband. In 2000, it doesn't feel like that long ago, and I'll date myself here, but we were dialing up on the internet, letting the phone line screech at us, and we had 56K, and it was the most exciting thing. And people said, "What could we do with broadband? Who needs that bandwidth?" And then you could have had YouTube, any of the things we have now. So that all to say, I think we're at the point now that we're scaling, and I think AI, if that's okay with you, we can spend some time there. You guys like? I think there's a lot of crossover.
Yeah. We heard, so actually our last episode, our first episode of 2024 focused on kind of this intersection of AI and blockchain, like how AI is empowering some developments in blockchain, but also vice versa. So I'd love to hear your take on what are the things in blockchain that are going to be key to solving some of these big questions in AI that we're facing right now.
Yeah, there's a couple pillars here. I think there's the verification pillar, where we talk about deepfakes. There's verification of data sets. How do we know these training models have good data? Are they using are they biased? But also, how do we have that kind of like openness and collaboration, but still respect IP rights and all of that? So I think to tackle the first pillar here, verification is going to be huge. I mean, deepfake. I think we're all aware at this point of deepfakes and the problems and challenges that they provides, not the word, result in. And it's only going to get worse, right? That cat's out of the bag. There's no amount of legislation that's going to get rid of that. But where I think blockchains come into play here is that being able to cryptographically sign a piece of media is going to be huge, because we're already approaching the point where it's hard to tell. Is that a real video of, of President Trump or President Obama saying whatever, or Biden, insert any person of consequence in there. It's becoming more and more difficult, where we are now, to say like, oh, that's really Biden, or that's not Biden. And it's only going to get worse. But being able to have the beauty of the blockchain is that you have these public ledgers, and you're able to sign and see not only the provenance, but like the kind of like chain of custody of where it goes. So having systems to where pieces of media have a cryptographic signature, so that it's coming from a trusted source. Say this is like a direct White House press briefing, and it's only signed by the president of the office, or say that's from Congress, and take that down to corporation levels as well. You can have market moving news that could be fake, but if I know this comes from actually from Jensen at NVIDIA, and I can see that's cryptographically signed, then that becomes less of a you don't have to worry about being able to tell, because there's that kind of underlying framework that allows for that. So that I think is one of the no-brainer kind of pieces there, and that's something that we're going to desperately need, because that could go awry. We all know that bad news travels fast. So I think any kind of questions there before we move on to some of the other pieces?
Jared, I mean, I think you're talking about all the things that people have sort of been dreaming of with the utility of the blockchain, being able to trust things again. That's what it was all about originally when Bitcoin was invented. The first white paper was all about creating a trust system that didn't require a third party. I'm curious how. And maybe I should ask you the question as opposed to making a statement. My understanding has always been that the reason this hasn't happened is not because the technology wasn't there, because the technology to do exactly what you're describing was there 5 years ago. But the reason that it hasn't been implemented is it's a societal, cultural, educational thing where people are just not ready for the transition to a blockchain-oriented identification system economy, which seems like a natural for identification, for passports, to prevent identity theft. And I'm curious, what will it take? And first of all, there's a premise of my question, which is what I just said, that it's a societal acceptance of blockchain technology. But so I'd like your comment on that. But I'd also like to understand, if that is correct, what will transition mainstream society, mainstream corporations, government to a place where they will use blockchain in the way you just described?
I love it. Thanks for asking the easy questions, Alan. I appreciate that. So I think there are answers to that, but there's not one, I think, single factor here. I think from a technical standpoint, I think you're correct. I think I would even say that the actual concepts that underpin, like what we're talking about, just say digital identity, even predate 5 years ago. Which is something I was researching recently, that zero knowledge proofs is a concept, and that you'll see often in crypto, which essentially, in the barest of basic terms, is like being able to prove that something is true or not true without actually revealing any information. Like there, say, I think the an analog would be, when you say you go to a store and you go buy alcohol, you show them your ID, which tells them whether or not you're 21 or not, but also tells you full name, your address, whether you're Oregon donor, all this superfluous information that they don't actually need, when really all they really need to know is is this a government ID? Yes or no? Are you 21 or older? Yes or no? And the math that makes that work well beyond my scope, but so that was proposed in 1985, but the problem is, it's like, and when I found that out, I was like, oh, I had the similar kind of vein of thinking of you. I was like, why haven't we been using this the entire time? So there's two things I think that have been holding it back that no longer are. One is the computational power that able to do that was just not available. That's a very computationally intensive kind of thing to be able to make that work. But good news is that that exists now, and also you need the database for that to live on. Where kind of like a trustless kind of party there, which I think blockchains now provide. But I think which takes us to our next kind of thing. It's like, all right, well, I think broadly, to your point, like the broad, like kind of like crypto is not new at this point. But what has been hindering adoption? One is scalability. I mean, we are just now entering the point where there are blockchain networks that can process transactions that in the thousands in a cheap manner. Because the base, like Ethereum or Bitcoin, we're talking about low double digits. They can process anywhere between 7 and 15 transactions per second. And that gets expensive the more demand there is to it. So to build these kind of like large systems where we need at scale to be able to prove identity, it's not feasible, when it costs sometimes $30, $50. It's not even feasible if it costs $1 there. And we had been largely, what had been a kind of feature for a long time, especially for Bitcoin, becomes a hindrance to adoption. But we're at the phase now, which I think we're kind of at this like turning point here with the advent of layer 2 blockchains built on Ethereum, which allow for the scaling to get, like when we have like optimistic rollups like Optimism, Arbitrum, that can process in the thousands, then those kind of things become feasible. Or Solana, which is a separate layer 1, can process, up to over 100,000, and we're starting to get into the territory where Visa can only, say depending on who you ask, somewhere around 60,000 transactions per second. So we're getting to the point now where we're able to have the scale where they can process the demand, but also the cost is important. So that has been, I think, the biggest hindrance for a long time. You can't build these large kind of systems that when, Ethereum costs you, can depends on the demand, $1, $20, $40, $50. That's not the kind of variable cost that anybody's going to accept there. So that has been a big hindrance there. From a societal standpoint, I think crypto has a bad rap, and I think a lot of it is like, if we're being, I think in the industry, if we're being honest, intellectually honest, a lot of it's deserved. Where we've had there's been this, I think Chris Dixon really lays it out well, of like the computer versus the casino, where we're talking about the computer being, having these underlying systems that can do identity and like cool things with finance. And then there's the casino, where you have your like Dogecoin, you have FTX, all of these, kind of speculative things. And I'm not to say, but I think where it does get an unfair rap is that it feels like that's like a unprecedented kind of thing. But all big technology like shifts when you're in them have the speculative, the tulip mania, if you will. And I think we're just in what's new about now is that we're in this hyper kind of online kind of like sensationalized environment. Doesn't matter what end of political spectrum you are and who you are. Like, there are just, these news cycles are short, and if it bleeds, it leads, they say. And I think there's been a lot of focus on the bad, where I think we've kind of hitting we've hit critical mass, where there's, not only are we able to like have the foundation to do a lot of these things, there are things that are already happening that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. Like the decentralized physical infrastructure, decentralized social. Like, these are things you can go use today, and that wasn't true really 6 months ago, a year ago. This is moving very quickly, but it's a lot of bad PR, if I wanted to wrap it up there, that we've had a lot of the froth for many years. And there's like this kind of hump we have to get over to narratively to really say like, hey guys, everything we've been talking about for many years is actually possible now.
I want to jump in just a couple of things that you raised there. Like this concept of like, we're waiting for this sea change, like almost like getting to the use cases where blockchain actually makes sense, getting past the froth. But then and coming at this with my Wilson hat on, we're always thinking about how are policymakers thinking about this technology. It seems like there's either been, because of the focus on risk, there's either been a lot of interest in like banning things without necessarily understanding what we're saying no to long term, or there's an interest in just doing nothing and waiting it out to see what happens next. And so my feeling is that and the reason we're doing this is because we think if people understood the technology better, if they understood the use cases better, they would be ready to make some kind of decision. But we've talked a lot about the regulatory climate, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what is the regulatory climate affecting in terms of the use cases we can implement. Is it hindering the industry, or what are we doing?
Yeah, we're hindering, and in some respects, on the current trajectory. If we're talking about innovation based specifically in the U.S., we're on the way. We're hindering at best. On the way to cripple, at worst. I think if we, not to draw another parallel to like the internet age in the 90s, but these things work in cycles, and history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. Where we had I think legislators had the foresight in the internet era to have like a kind of light touch regulation that provided a framework. Section 230. I know now there's all kinds of, that's a hot topic. But, if we fast forward, Section 230 in the 90s and the internet era was a good kind of like, middle ground kind of thing, and nobody was trying to regulate a lot of like what we have in crypto from a foundational standpoint. We're talking about these base blockchain layers that everything's built on. It's like TCP. It's like domain service. It's like all of these they're the new primitives for the kind of internet here. And it's like, if you imagine if we went back to the 90s and we tried to regulate, you can do this with TCP, we never would have had the internet that we have today. And I think where it gets kind of messy, I think, is that, I think one of the counter arguments is like, well, there's the financial aspect, but I think that honestly is it's not a bug, it's a feature. Because if you think about some of these open protocols that you're like, well, why can't we just do this with a nonprofit, right? I don't know if we remember, are you guys familiar with RSS? Yeah.
Why you go into
Yeah. So RSS does still technically exist today, and essentially it's a decentralized kind of like standard before decentralized standards were cool kind of thing. But essentially it's like a feed that you can publish that was just a public feed, and you can get, like, if any podcast, non-Spotify podcast player, that's published on RSS. Most websites and blogs, you can pull an RSS feed and then you pull that into a feed. Google Reader was a popular, tool or app to access RSS. And there was a lot of stuff that was built on RSS, but RSS was a nonprofit. It had there was, volunteers keeping it together there, and nobody to really develop it. And for a long time, there was in the early 2000s, in the kind of blog era, there was people were like, well, is it going to be these social networks, or is it going to be RSS? And RSS was doing well, but what killed it, had two death strokes. One was the advent of mobile, and we start getting these closed ecosystems, and then the inability for it to store data, which is where it changes from a blockchain. Because the founder of Wired was actually building. They put a lot of time and effort into building a kind of like decentralized alternative to Facebook, Twitter, and all of that. But what they ultimately ran into the wall is that there's no way to store a username or information of that, and there was no capital behind it to kind of develop that, and ultimately it died. And then we start to get to these closed ecosystems here. So I think that's that all to say, not to get too far from your question, Kelly. I think there's a bit of a middle ground. We need some level of kind of like common sense framework here in the US, because there are just companies. There's just companies who are not founding here anymore because the regulatory environment's too uncertain. And who knows that it's like, I don't know if I'm going to be deemed a security, so why would I take that risk? Where we're trying to apply rules from like the 1930s, and I'm in no way. And I think the crypto industry wants some kind of framework here in the US, but we really have a real brain drain here that when a lot of these new protocols are just founding, in Singapore or Japan. Even the EU has better, more clear regulations than we do right now, which, generally, you don't find that the EU is ahead of us on innovation here. But we're really getting in our own ways here by, the kind of like lack of the ambiguity is really, I think, what's killing us here. But I think to your point, though, if we're being fair, I think a lot of the use cases and information hasn't been articulated well. So, that's like not to say it's like, I think in the crypto industry, we like to say, like, why not rule? Like, why don't you understand us? And I'm like, well, I don't think anybody's really kind of made the honest efforts here, which is honestly, one of my kind of key missions. I've lived in both sides. I'm trying to I'm trying to bridge it
Yeah,
here.
Jared, yeah, I want to follow up on what you just said about bridging that because, a part of our initial initiative of setting up the Digital Assets Forum and Lab was to educate people, was to really bring people on board to help society, as it was, to understand that blockchain technology is not equal to cryptocurrency casino. And we've done that very successfully. We built out a series of education programs for Congress, on the Hill. We did it for the executive branch. We've had a number of initiatives with government officials, with the mayor of Miami came. We've done a lot to try to bring people to level set this understanding of what blockchain technology is and what it can actually accomplish. This technology that existed 5 years ago that people should start implementing today. One of our initiatives, and you've been great with this, is that we've been working with you on the blockchain briefs, is trying to get people up to speed to understand what's going on and what's actually possible. I would love to hear for our viewers, for our listeners, for the Wilson Center, what you think an individual who has the ability to frame a corporation, the framework for what they're going to do a year from now, 2 years from now, 6 months from now, and also government officials, what they are thinking about in terms of regulation. What is the best way to get up to speed to a place where they can really understand how to make the right decisions? And I'm not being self-serving, and I know a part of that is listening to these podcasts and the blockchain briefs, but what else is there that is out there that can really get people into the flow of what's going on so they don't just hear the headlines, but they also understand what's actually going on in the backbone of the industry?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think not to talk the own book here, but I think obviously resources like this are really important. I think you mentioned Laura. I know you've had Laura Shin on here previously, but that's honestly an excellent source. She's another one who comes from the non-crypto world, but is curious by the crypto world here. I think. I wish there was an easy answer of like there being a central place that that is. I think you need to kind of build these things together. But there's finding the founders, I think, of the key protocols are good people to kind of like follow. The more like the Vitalik Buterins of the world, Anatoly Yakovenko's, who obviously are going to be pro crypto, but aren't the casino version of crypto here. So those are good resources. Not to this is my alma mater, but they were my alma mater for a reason. But I think research firms like Messari is a really good source for that. They're kind of an analog if you think about they don't necessarily love this, but it's accurate. But it's kind of like the Bloomberg of crypto. I think also just going out there and reading the if you're of the technical variety, read the white papers and see what they're saying there. You can get a lot from it. They say that code is law, and I think you kind of have to get a bit of everything. There's not a universal source. You kind of have to get the kind of pro crypto people and some of like the anti crypto people to like and kind of see and kind of get yourself in the middle there. I wish there was an easy source. And it's one of the. And I mean, it's obviously, I think the top reason that I work with you guys here that, I'm squarely a nonpartisan, like by definition. I'm a pragmatist, which is why, longtime listener, first time caller here, for Wilson Center work. So I think a lot of what we're doing here, I would actually use this as a call for those who are interested in the space and do have the capacity to start putting out better, digestible information. We're in desperate need.
Yeah, Jared, I want to add one thing to what you suggest. I think reading the white papers, great. That's really interesting because that's how I first got into the cryptocurrency blockchain space. And another thing that I would suggest, just to add on to all the things that you listed, is I taught myself how to program. I'm not a programmer by nature. That's not my background. I'm a financial policy guy. But I taught myself how to program on blockchains, and I did that by watching YouTube videos. And
yeah.
and it gets demystified And maybe we should have a blockchain explained where we show somebody how to create a cryptocurrency or how to create an NFT, because it's really not so hard. And I think
you're going to get the SEC on us, Alan.
Well, no, we are very. I believe that there is a very specific statement that nothing in here is investment advice or anything that you should listen to for any advice to do anything, except for the fact that I think people do need to become educated. And I think that diving in is the best way, as you described. Jared, thank you so much for being here and for all you're doing for Wilson.
Yeah.
Oh, no, absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Jared. Thank you, Alan, as always, for joining me for a great conversation. And we will keep our eyes peeled. When this episode airs, we should have the latest blockchain brief up on zero knowledge proofs, which Jared talked about a little earlier, and is a topic that I think people will really find fascinating for how much it makes these identity questions and verification questions work. So thank you again. We hope our listeners will join us for the next episode after this, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Blockchain Explained. Please note, nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Want more clear-eyed analysis of this exciting technology? Search for Digital Assets Forum at the Wilson Center for Research, event recordings, and more. Want to ask our hosts a question? Write to STIP, S-T-I-P, at wilsoncenter.org with your thoughts. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Blockchain Explained.